Hi, hi Miguel.
Hi, Sandris.
It's a big pleasure to have you in my blog. So today I will interview Miguel Llanque from Bolivia. He's composer and performer. So Miguel, tell me a little bit what is good composition for you?
That's a very difficult question. Maybe not so much, but I think in, you could say that it depends on the vitality or in the effect that the music takes you. It's like a force, like a transformative force, and many times it has to do with his pertinence in a certain context or time. So, but it also, I think it's mostly in that direction. What I think about um, what you could call a good composition, and it has to do with accomplishing something and translating some kind of intuition or some kind of information that is lying in like in another dimension or another kind of layer of knowledge, and that is and sometimes it's possible to bring it here so other people could relate also in their own way with that information of that thing.
And what do you think? What is your, let's say, musical signature or idea which you usually, I don't know, or not usually, maybe more often came back, right? Or
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I didn't.
what is your, let's say, what is your musical idea or maybe signature, which is usually, some ideas which you usually work on or of?
I'm very interested in finding models in acoustic relations, everyday acoustic situations, and also in repeating this operation and applying this operation in different contexts. For instance, you could say, for example, just a random example, an old wall with cracks and could be a source of information and form and even structural means. At the same level, I think that you can approach traditional music, for instance, like a block of knowledge and information and relations, and that you could use as a model or as a starting point so I think this is not a postmodern attitude, but it is like a way of understanding things as continents. There are contents implied, implicit things in all things around us, in everything around us. So, for example, I sometimes apply operations with recordings, like putting many microphones in a very large and open space and recording one sound from a very long distance. So this difference in time because of the reflections and the speed of sound produces some kind of relations, very particular relations, rhythmic relations that are interesting then and to translate or in another kind of support, like a score or an audio score to be performed by instruments, musical instruments. That kind of operation I very interested in, and yeah, because in my context in La Paz, there is a very much alive tradition of music, of traditional music, Aymara music. Is very that context give you a very interesting place to hear and find things and ask questions. So I think that is a very stimulating situation to be in. Not to make some references, necessarily make references to the traditional music, but just like a place where there is a very strong musical practice in that direction.
Yeah. Can you just a little bit maybe tell or describe what this traditional context in Bolivia is, right? Because most probably me or maybe other from Europe doesn't know, right?
Yeah, there is a very old tradition in the Andean region, which is a very big region and very varied, different kinds of places you can find here from Ecuador to Argentina. It's not like a uniform cultural space, but in the area in which I live, there is a very strong tradition in wind instruments that are played usually in big ensembles. Just so you have some kind of idea. If you have if you imagine like Renaissance consort, flute consort, but with many duplications of each register, and with another absolutely different aesthetic ideal of sound and function of the sonor sound event. Like it's like a sonor sound system that has a lot to do with some ritualistic activities. Now is not that much because not so much because this music was very related to agriculture, and that kind of practice is disappearing here in the Andean region because of global warming and socioeconomic reasons. So the practices are changing, are very much alive. The music you heard as traditional music in the 80s is very different from the traditional music you can hear today in the same kind of instrument. So every region has his own specialities, if you will. There is a very vast variety of instruments and variation of these instruments. So variants of these instruments. And so each community build his own sound, like an identity structure, sound structure, in terms of register, ways of producing the sound in attack, or very specific things, and very how do you say this? Is very precise the way in each community builds their own sound. So from the city, this Bolivia is a very segregated country. It's not a racial only. It's not only a problem of race. It's also social condition problem. So it's very divided. So in the city, there is another kind of music derived from the music of the countryside, of the rural area, that is more like urban, more tempered, as you will. You can play with a guitar or with a keyboard, and zampoña, and a quena, but and it has its own tradition. But also in this urban space, there is some composers and performers that are interested and relate with this, in building a relation with this tradition, that very interesting tradition. Sometimes that could be in like just making references like nationalistic music in Europe. Also, I think that happened, and sometimes some a stage of in some period, historic period in which it was important to make reference to the music. So
Yes.
that is also like a tendency in American in Bolivia from the 30s, I think, and so on. But there are also like a more avant-garde approach in which these instruments with these wind instruments, for example, for instance, are treated like a new source of sound, just with different characteristics in terms of tuning, timbre, and many other possibilities of interaction and so on. And there are other people that simply doesn't make any kind of use of these instruments, and they are only working like with the idea of the this heritage.
Yes.
So this brings a lot of questions that we are trying to answer. I think the new generations are having a more open and interesting solution that could be simple, that of relating with everything so is around you with the same interest.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that is very interesting, very important, because that allow us to work more freely, and the music is also better, I think, because of that approach.
And what's your way, right? You said this, as I understand, right, that you are very interested in models, right? And then in that context, right, this, you said this, let's say, traditional, right, specific, very specific traditional music context from this region. But how you use usually this context? Do you like to use instruments or use their ideas and put into, let's say, into Western type of music, right?
Yeah, well, I think when we think about ourselves, we don't think that in these terms, like this is Western or this is Andean, because it's a very complex, as you know, and intricate relation between those two cultures. But also, it's impossible to talk about them completely separate, like separate entities. It's not real. So I think sometimes we call it here academic music or Western music. Western music this music comes from the Western tradition, but is now part of the American tradition also, Latin American tradition. Yeah, quoting Rodolfo Acosta, a Colombian composer. More than 400 years of Western music in America implies that it's not longer something separated from us. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a very interesting way of putting the problem. My approach to this possibility is this one. I was interested very much in the spatial situation, like the situation in which musicians, for example, in a traditional context, I mean, for example, you have like 24 musicians playing the same instrument at the same time in a large space, an open space. And there are also, in some cases, like dancers that sometimes they have sound like idiophone instruments that also sound. So the perspective of listening is very interesting, because you are not in a concert hall, you're not in a situation in which musicians are separate from the audience. So the relations are very different. There is not like a sound result, or the sound object, if you will, like if you think in the piece in the music, the whole piece, like as just one sound object. It's not something that you can contemplate from far away. It's something that changes depending where you're standing, or depending what time of day is, how long are they are playing. If maybe you are closer to the high pitch instruments, or maybe you're closer to the low pitch instruments. So that, and maybe they are moving in circles or walking toward some place. So this kind of listening allows you to think about many possibilities. One of the pieces I made with this was like simply like this idea of a polyphonic orchestral polyphony. Some musicologists call it that way, like very different various ensembles at the same time with some kind of relations and movement on space. So I made a piece called Hiwaki that has that intention. It's a music in which you can, it's like a performative installation, if you will, where you can walk around the musicians and have a different experience depending on in which space you are. Very much like you can do with acoustic music or music made for speakers or something like that. But the idea of a whole, like a whole object with different participants, different kinds of energies simultaneously, I took it from the traditional context without any kind of reference to the traditional music. This piece is made with only invented instruments that made these kind of sounds, like beating sounds. There are also they also come from the traditional context. The idea of unison, as in Western music, is different in the Andean region. The unison cannot be exact. Cannot be. It's not possible. A minor second cannot be. It's not a unison, but could be like a quarter tone or so. But in fact, if you play a perfect unison, is considered to be like something not that interesting. It's not a good unison. So also there are lots of multiphonics, since these are instruments, wind instruments. Their construction, the construction of the instruments, the traditional instruments, is many times is directed to produce multiphonic sounds and with lots of aeolic component. So all this kind of sound ideas are also in this piece Hiwaki that I was talking about, but with different sound sources. They are wind instruments, some kind of also like mobile instruments, and lots of movement around the space. Other way in which I approach this is a piece called Cinquena. Cinquenas. You can translate it as without quenas, being the quena one of the more iconic, I think, instruments of the Andean region, a wind instrument. And also, what I did in this piece is trying to listen just like a frozen moments in the lines, inside the melodic lines, like making a very pronounced stretching of the sound, like stretching the sound wave, but with a very high quality, because it's for cello and percussion. So and also using the traditional music as a memory device for the musicians. For example, the two players the two percussion players in this piece has to imagine. They have to sing the tunes silently in their heads, and play along without lines, without music. So it's like a kind of writing, a quiet writing a structure, a sound structure that they can imagine, and what we hear is the interaction of the instruments with that memory. So for me, for a long time, I didn't want to make any piece with the real Andean instruments, because as we talked earlier, it's very much, sometimes it's too related to this, like a political statement of the indigenous instruments. They must be recovered, and so on. I don't think that is interesting at all.
But you like to create your own instruments, right?
Yeah, and I think sometimes there are like composition approaches that rely only in, for example, in very complex techniques, instrumental techniques. So on the novelty, I think that I don't know, or very complicated electronic system. So it's more like the novelty, that the deepness of the music. So something similar, of course, happens with these instruments. Like for an European ear, when you hear a piece or these instruments, is, I think, most of the times very interesting. And you are hearing the instruments because they are refreshing this quality of the new thing, but the composition is not really that interesting. It's just more like the instruments are themselves interesting. It's like to make a piece for an organ. Of course, fantastic. It's a fantastic instrument, but it's not necessarily a good piece. So in that situation, I try to avoid, but avoid about composing for those instruments, but in a very active attitude for listening the instruments as a valid source of knowledge and possibilities. Because I am here, I live in La Paz, and is the most, I think, the most interesting music in La Paz. So why not be close to that? I think any musician with a real interest in some kind of intense experience, if you are here in La Paz, you have to listen to that music.
Got it. And what's your way of composing, right? From what you start and what are stages you're going through?
I think it's very traditional in the Western traditional way. I have like a stage of investigation, if you will, just like listen to music, watch scores sometimes, or read papers about some acoustical phenomenon, books. For example, now if I'm interested in some kind of thing like perspective, for example, I try to reach to read the literature about that particular subject. But I have like the intuition of the piece, and then I start to write not a score, but the conceptual ideas of the piece. What is the piece, and what is not the piece? So I kind of to have to try everything. Everything surrounding the original idea or the primarily intuition, So I have to try everything surrounding that area of knowledge, and then I find what I think is truly the piece. Um, and then this is a very important part, I think, for me. It very much depends on who is going to play the piece. Oh, in La Paz, there are not many ensembles of people interested in playing. So many times we ourselves have to play the pieces or work with a group of musicians that are interested in making contemporary music, but that they are not always specialists in their instruments. So the kind of writing or the way the way in which the pieces can be is relying also in the possibility of the playability of the piece. So and that is a constant, I think, in every context, but especially here, many music from the 60s until now has that approach. If you want to hear the music and you really want to participate into this very interesting relation between composers, performers, and our audience, and you have to think in a way in doing a good piece, good music that can be played very well in our context. So many times the scores cannot be that much detailed. If I make a score that is very detailed, has every aspect of the sound written, is not. It is possible that it is not going to work, and so we can't find. We must find another kind of strategies. Like this idea I was telling you about, imagine a music in your head, and the resulting sound is going to be a new kind of texture that is controlled, but not in the whole. And so I think that is also, I like I work in acoustic music, electroacoustic pieces, but I do it, I think, in a similar way, like a period of investigation and then I'm trying to approach everything around, surrounding that idea, and often thinking in the way it's going to be performed.
So it's like a research stage, right? Then, as I understand, is a way when you create a concept by writing the concept out, right? And concept, most probably you write with words, right? Not with musical.
No, yeah, totally. I don't write music. I don't write the score until the end.
Okay, then you imagine what's possible or not, and who can perform, and only then you start writing scores. Yes.
At the end, yeah, the score is like the last problem. For example, we tried lots of approaches. Some we also I made some pieces, for example, that have like an oral score, in which I have the idea and the form and the structural devices, but if the musicians cannot read music, what is the possible solution? It was to memorize everything in a very so the experience with the sound and the repetition is very intense. So it's almost like doing acoustic music. You can hear at the same time as you're working, but with real people.
Yes.
So and also of course that kind of that kind of work needs lots of preparation from the composer, because you cannot abuse the time of people, and you really must know. I think, at least in my from my point of view, what in what direction you are going, because otherwise can go completely out of control.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, so that's also a way you can do it. There are also here performers that could read very well and play music in that tradition. That you have the score, and but even in that kind of composition, I think it's very important to work with the performance. Before, I don't like that much just sending the score. I think I enjoy very even more than the performance. The most important thing for me, the most enjoyable thing for me, is the period of preparation with the performance, because that is the time where everything comes to comes to existence.
Yes.
So yeah, and that's where you are really generating things and ideas, and that is the most wonderful thing for me. If it's possible, I always try to do it that way. Also, as a performer, because I have an ensemble here, and always, if we can, uh, um, we propose to composers, please don't forget about us during the composition process. Call us, send us to ideas. We can record ideas and prove it, and exchange solutions. And I think that is the most interesting thing for me. It's like experience. The experience, no? The experience is very important.
Yes. And looking right back, like 10 years, uh, what is the main changes in your music, right?
Yeah, a good question. I think that the main difference is, 10 years ago, I was doing music very much like in the direction I was telling you about before, this idea of listening to the traditional music, hearing profound phenomenon, and making pieces for ensembles that with some kind of writing that could be very efficient at the moment of performance and rehearsing. That now I am writing some more complicated things because the context has changed a lot in 10 years. And precisely on those 10 years, when 10 years ago, we were the youngest generation of composers. I was born in 1981. And we were not that many, we were like 8 persons. I don't know. I think 8 composers in La Paz, and 5 of them were active. So it's very complicated. Now there is like we had a project here. I am part of a collective, composers and performers collective of contemporary music. We made like a school of composition, and from that generation, the people that was born from the 90s and 2000, you have like 20 composers. I don't know, more.
Got it.
So, and they are studying and working. It's very interesting. And so in those 10 years, everything changed, I think. So the people in which we interact is a very informed people, very much informed people and interested people. 10 years ago, you don't have that. So my music in that sense, sorry, has changed a lot because I can relate with much more people, and think in music much more complex in his, for example, in the writing area. and also in a level of understanding the ideas.
Yes. So your music, due to the way where the young generation of performers and composers, your music could be more complex than before, right? This I understand.
Exactly, and it's not that the complexity in itself is interesting. I don't think so, but I think more that the complexity of the writing of the ideas is the that we have more possibilities of communication. I think now it's very different because with the internet and this kind of communication media, it's very easy to be close to lots of kinds of knowledge, of points of view, experiences, and I think that is a very good thing. But I don't think that ever is going to replace the experience of your place.
Yes.
Because it's a very strong experience, and it is not it's not like a folkloristic way, like that your place is wonderful and your tradition is wonderful. Often tradition is very bad, I think, but very bad for human beings. But the experience around you is the most profound experience you can get. So even if you travel, even if you are living in another country, I think that allows to build like connections, like it happens in the brain, generate connections between things that weren't connection, were not connected before. So now we can speak and work from a starting a point, a much more complex context, in the sense of in which in a real sense of complexity, we have more relations possible simultaneously. Yes. Yeah.
And how technological development, right, influence your music?
Yeah, I have a complicated relation with technology. I like it very much, but I think that I arrived a bit late to start working on that. But I'm very interested in acousmatic music, that is like a very old thing now, because allows me to achieve a result as I need to be, a very specific kind of solutions and multi-channel dispositions, or mono, or whatever. But regarding electronics, for example, I made a piece for Kena and electronics. I have a sensor, a wind sensor attached to the Kena, and it works. It works, but I'm not sure that is the way the direction I want to go. But basically, what I can say about that is that I am very interested in the possibilities that you can achieve with softwares like Pure Data and so on. But I prefer to use that knowledge and that experience into real instruments.
Yes.
That they are also real. I think traditional instruments, conventional objects, I'm not that sure. I think the thinking the achievements and the things that you can hear now with electronics and those kind of ideas are very interesting, very good. And I think now is just the moment in which this is like crystallizing. I think for the last, this is a brutal generalization, but I think the last 20 years, it was like a preparation, like a time for testing. But now you can hear very good pieces, very profoundly constructed, that they overpass the banality of the novelty, and this is happening, I think recently. So in my case, I don't think I can achieve that kind of perfection with electronics.
Mhm.
But I'm very interested, and I'm studying as much as I can every day about that, but not for doing electronic music, but for apply that kind of experience into another kind of format, instrumental format.
And what you as composer fears the most, right? What is your composer fear?
The repetition.
Repetition? Why?
Sorry?
Why repetition, right?
Well, it's complicated because I was just reading about this. I think, for me at least, as like a very personal experience with the composition, and with composition, every piece must be its own experience. I respect very much the composers that do this, but the idea of making several pieces starting from the same idea or solution even, I don't find it that interesting. Also, I know that that is part of a art market.
Yes.
Like you have to have like a profile, no? This is the composer that makes music with the indigenous instruments. This is the composer that makes music with, I don't know, with sensors and lights, and then so every piece must be like that. So I understand that, and I think also it's possible that some composer can do that and be amazing in that. No, you can hear many pieces about this from the same starting point, and be great. But in my case, I have some repetitions, maybe more than I would like, but I'm trying to avoid very well-defined profiles. I don't know if it's possible. So that's why I think, from my perspective, that with exception of some group of pieces, there is not like distinctive idea for every piece. For example, I was talking about these pieces these models, these ready-made models that I use for composing. I also made a piece for example, for cello solo, in which there is like a collage of composition in which I take not quotes, but very insignificant fragments of cello literature, music for cello in 20th century, but from Debussy to some friends I have. So that these fragments, they are not quotes. You cannot recognize, but precisely they are sound moments on the pieces that are apparently insignificant. So you could say that a piece in which the construction is like a collage of cello parts, cello fragments, is very different to a piece that comes from Andean ensemble of wind instruments. And so I am very interested in that, finding different possibilities. So my biggest fear that I think is already happened is to run out um, of this vitality. I think of finding in every piece something different.
Got it. Got it.
Mm-hmm.
And now, question from my friend, composer Francois Chiran. I asked, like every composer, that why do you still compose, right?
I don't want to be sentimental, but I think that there is no other way to be in the world. I think the world is wonderful. It's amazing. I don't think it's full of surprises and of secrets and things. So composing is a way of scratching, I think, the surface of this amazing reality.
And just not maybe not looking on yourself, but right, but like being like observer, right? During this century, right, in the last 20 years, what's the biggest changes in the new music landscape in Bolivia, right? How it changed?
In the last 20 years.
Yes, this century, yes.
This century, yeah. Well, in Bolivia is a very big change. And with the pandemics, this has been, this phenomenon has been accelerated. In the beginning of the century, just that as a context, I think it's important. In the last century, there were no place to study composition in Bolivia. We have a conservatory, places to study instruments, but there was not a place for composition. And in the 70s, Alberto Pando and Carlos Rosso, very important Bolivian musicians, one is a composer, Alberto Pando, and a conductor, Carlos Rosso. They made a career for composition and conducting. From that, and was just one generation. From that generation, we have some important composers, but was like how many times? Like 40 years, almost 40 years of distance from this generation to the next generation that could study composition in Bolivia. Mm-hmm. And that second generation is my generation. I didn't study with them. I studied in Chile, but all my friends and my colleagues now studied in that place with Alberto Villalpando again, Prudencio and Rosso also. So before that, in that space of time, there were no possibilities of studying in Bolivia composition. Some people went outside Bolivia and looked for other places to study and work. So as you can imagine, that is a very complicated scenario, because I think if you have more people doing something, the more people you have, more vitality, more solutions, more interesting things can happen. So at the beginning of the century, you had a group of students that were studying this second experience of this composition career, and also other composers from the past working with very sporadically some pieces for orchestra, choir, also for instruments, traditional instruments. But there are a few, like Alberto Villalpando was the only one, and Sergio Prudencio, like, and other composers that were outside Bolivia also were working, but was very little. So this new group, in my generation, once they finished their studies, started to work very hard, make lots of work, concerts, workshops, and many other kinds of activities in order to spread um, these ideas and to help themselves also to work and do other kind of things. But there wasn't a serious place, interesting place to study composition after them, and neither. So there were like two ensembles that were dedicated to contemporary music, or some ensembles that made some concerts, but sporadically, not like a fixed institutions. So at the 2015, we made this School of Composition. We had many invited teachers and professors that help us to create this new generation of composers that I was talking about before. And now in that period there were some sporadically active ensembles and composers, but now in three different cities from Bolivia, you have festivals of contemporary music, especially in Cochabamba. Cochabamba is one of the important cities in Bolivia. We have a very important festival there for us that is organized by CAM with Pando as an organizer. And in La Paz, there is Casa Taller, OEIN, lots of different ensembles also. In Santa Cruz, there were they have like this like festivals, but not like workshops and that kind of things. So, and there are also many Bolivians outside Bolivia studying and working. So I think in the last 10 years, 20 years, but especially in the last 10, is like another completely different place because of this acceleration of initiatives of formation, academic formation. And now we have in the conservatory composition.
Mm-hmm.
So that it has 2 years or so. So it's a interesting moment. And with the pandemics, I think the youngest generations are very much informed about the latest things, and they could study and online courses with great composers and also travel and so on. So I think it's very good now, and more varied also. There is one, because when you have a few people, it's just like just one view.
Yes.
It's very bad. So now we have very different points of view, and I think it's very bad. That is very healthy for
yes.
a society.
Yes, and how change audience, right, for that period of time? Is it becoming more and more younger or older, or?
I think it's more and more younger. I think it's maybe something similar happens in other countries. Contemporary concerts, contemporary music concerts have always young audiences, except when you have this program for instance, the symphonic orchestra from Bolivia plays contemporary music one time, and it's very expensive. the young people try to go. Sometimes they let them in from the back door, but the audience is very much older.
Yes.
But other kind of um, ensembles or performances have a very young audience that is also very close to popular music, rock music, another kind of folk traditional music, urban traditional music. So I think that is interesting here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what do you see? What is the biggest trend? Future trends, right? Where is this? Let's say Bolivian new music scene trends, right? Where it goes?
Always is difficult. It's always difficult to know, but I think that it's going to grow inevitably because of this tendency. I was talking about these two experiences more than 3 decades apart, then 10, 10 years apart, then 4. Now you have this composition career in the conservatory. So, and these young composers are very much, they are very active composers. They are traveling, studying, trying things. So I think it's a very interesting future in which we can think of. Um, um, I think it's going to be more open, um, less centered in the tradition, the Andean tradition, and more connected with a global perspective, if that is something that is real. um, um,
So it's more, let's say, more Western type, more technology based, right? All this you will see this will be go right in that direction it will go.
I think so because these composers, we don't have yet composers that are that have their studies like 10 years in the conservatory or 5 years of contrapoint harmony. And this is not something that is very high level here.
Mm-hmm.
So the new technologies are more they have more access to to that kind of training.
Yes.
And a very good one, an actualized one. So the tendency goes, I think, in that direction.
Yes, and maybe last question, right? How you see what is, let's say, new music role in Bolivian society?
I think that is a very conflictive problem. We are in a country that is frequently trying to answer questions about identity. It's a very complex cultural space. Um, we don't even know what is Bolivia as a unity. I think that is not possible. It's like a colonial and republican period imposition. This kind of idea of they made a uniform entity as a country. I think is very variety is the most important characteristic of this country. I think there are many different um, identities living in a common place, but we have problems, very big problems in other areas, specifically economic problems that are always affect the cultural world. It's not possible to separate them. So I think the importance of contemporary music is the same importance as no, not for Bolivia only, but for the world, the whole world. In the same way as literature, for example, a book or a novel can open questions and raise questions about the function of culture for humanity. The same thing that applies to any country if you that you think of, despite the specific background of the book. In music, I think is something similar. But basically the function of making questions and trying to approach, trying to make some answers, but especially questions. So it's like a way of thinking everything that is surrounding you. That could be also a social issue, cultural issue. I don't think that is and that is something that could be only applied inside Bolivia. I have some kind of I have some problems on thinking that, for example, a Bolivian piece or a piece made from some Bolivian composers or composer is only pertinent for the Bolivian context. I think it's wider than that. So it's an object that can be related with anyone in different ways.
So thank you very much, Miguel, for this interview. I enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you, Sandris. It was a pleasure for me, and I enjoyed it also very much.